Wow. This is a great view for a cemetery. They say cemetery, resting ground. It's terribly windy and we've got a freeway that runs just below us. So I'll see if I can find a little nook where it's not too windy. But yeah, this video is about some of my experiences and my thoughts and feelings. I think there's a motorbike hovering around as well. Apologies. There's also, this is a very popular road for people to travel up. So there's a freeway down below us, and then we've got one of our bigger hills around Mount Melbourne. And what happens is it's a windy road, or called the Windies, but it's a great scenic lookout. And we're currently in lockdown at the moment, but I think people might be getting out and just driving around a little bit. So it's a popular road for commercials, car commercials, and for people to just come up and have a look at, really. Okay, let me see if I can find a little nook. Yeah, so this video is going to be all about my time working in the cemetery. So I'll give you a little bit of a rundown on what normally happens. Don't forget to give the button a big thumbs up. Tap that subscribe button and even the notification button. That would help as well. So my longest period of working as a gardener has been in cemeteries. Overall, I've worked in 4 cemeteries. Having said that though, one cemetery trust owned 3 cemeteries, so I was lucky enough to, or fortunate enough to work in different ones for one trust, and then the other trust was just at the one cemetery. So these cemeteries were both old and new. So obviously you've got the memorial parks, which are more likely to be the older cemeteries, and then it ranges from the current cemeteries where, the operational working cemeteries to, the newer ones, obviously when you run out of land and such, which is what I think has happened to this cemetery that we're in today. So how I got started working in a cemetery was I applied for a job. At the time it was in the local paper, but nowadays you'd find them online obviously. And the hardest part about it all was the interview process, because I think it takes a special sort of person to work in a cemetery. It's not for everybody. So the interview questions were related around things that you might not like, working around graves, working around mourners, just the general vibe of the area, that sort of thing. Yeah, not easy questions really for a lot of people, most people to answer. But I'm going to tell you now my experience of working in the cemeteries. Okay, so my role was working as a gardener. So that involved mainly the maintenance of the plants and garden beds. So in garden beds, as you would in a lot of cemeteries, there was a lot of roses. So we had to, obviously in winter time, prune the roses, in summertime deadhead, the upkeep of the roses, because it is such a visual area. It was important to have them looking good all year round. But we also had things like hedges, and then we'd be creating new garden beds. So it was quite a full-on sort of work to maintain the upkeep of all these things. And then we did have people that would mow the lawns. So the cemeteries that I worked in, all but one of them I should say, They had a lawn area, so where people are buried and they don't have monuments or tombstones, if you want to call it that. So yeah, people buried just in the lawn area, and they would have a plaque. So we had people that would mow the lawn area. Having said that though, when things were busy or when people were away, we were called upon to mow the lawns. And then there was the other one was brush cutting as well. So brush cutting around the lawns. And it's important that you upkeep this to a high standard, because you do have people coming in and out all the time. So obviously you've got mourners, and then you've got people that are visiting graves, putting flowers down, making their graves or area look nice, all that sort of thing. Before I go any further, I was not a grave digger. I did not dig the graves. Having said that, you were around when graves were being dug. So there's a special process that goes through when you're digging graves. We were in a very sandy area, so most of the area that we were working in was very sandy. One of the cemeteries that I was working in was very rocky. So you had one extreme to the other. One was really easy to dig, the other one needed explosions or explosives or dynamite to make holes in the ground. So they were the two extremes of the areas that we were working at. So if they were going to, use dynamite, obviously the area had to be, cleared. We all had to keep a certain distance away, so we were all notified of that. There were signs up everywhere, so everybody knew. Nobody got hurt doing this, by the way. And then the other extreme was working in sandy soil. So sandy soil, you needed to shore it up, so there was a method in shoring it up. And obviously we're following the occupational health and safety rules for all this stuff as well. And then depending on the grave, and you'd find out beforehand, you would have to dig down to a certain depth. There's a process that is involved in it all. So, but that was not for me, I was for the gardening. As well as mowing the lawns in the lawn area, there was also filling in the graves. So what would happen in the lawn area would be the grave diggers would generally fill in the grave as much as they could, and they would leave a mound. So this mound would be left like that for a couple of days to allow for a bit of sinkage. And then what we would do was fill the grave up with water, and that would sink it to the level that it needed to go to, and then you would top dress it. So occasionally I might have done those sort of things if the person that normally did it wasn't around or on holidays. Generally, as you always do, you get asked when you're meeting people where you work. When I said a cemetery, people were, all sorts of different reactions, to shock, to surprise, to, tell me more. So, it's a bit of a different experience, I will say that, working in a cemetery. Overall, I would say I enjoyed it because it was like what I would call my quiet time. So I was able to, just get into my own little zone. Nobody really interrupted you. When there was a funeral nearby, you were able to, organise yourself so you could be in another area. So often you weren't in the same areas where a funeral would be, or, your supervisor might have given you a list of where they would be during the day, and you planned around that sort of thing. So you sort of invisible. So I've been to Disneyland a few times, not saying that a cemetery is anything like Disneyland. Well, it's a bit windy. But rarely do you see the gardeners in Disneyland. So they seem to make themselves invisible, and that's what we did, make ourselves invisible so people didn't see us. A few times you might get at some of the funerals where people were quite upset, but overall most people were pretty good. You quite often even hear a bit of laughter around. So not everybody was crying, and sometimes it depended on the nationalities. So we had a very multicultural sort of cemetery where there was many, many different nationalities that were there. And you also get to know people that come often. So some people come daily, some people come weekly, some would come on special occasions, anniversaries, that sort of thing. So you get to know a few people as well, and they would tend to the graves, or if they had a little cremated area or a tree or a plant, all different things. You just get to know the people, so it was really good. One of the things that we did at the cemeteries was go around on the lawn area and pick up all the flowers. So weekly we would go around and pick up all the flowers that people had placed at the graves. We would do this so then they could mow around it and keep it maintained to a high standard. Of course, people were quite upset about this, so yeah, they didn't like this a lot of the time. However, I think it did help with the area looking really nice and clean. Yeah, but a lot of people would get used to it, and they'd come and visit and place their flowers down, and then return the next week and do the same thing. So they'd sort of get into a routine with it. So at one of the cemeteries I was in charge, or had to look after the occupational health and safety. And part of this, I was never really involved in any of the burials, but if they had to exhume somebody, it was my responsibility to be there and make sure that they were following the safety procedures. So there is a very high safety procedure that needs to go along when they exhume people. Now, having said this, exhumations don't happen all that often. So you might get one a year if you're lucky. Sometimes you might get 2 a year and then not have any for a while. But they do happen for various reasons. And then there's, obviously, as I touched on earlier, roses. So along with pruning vines, I've spent a lot of hours pruning roses. Cemeteries are generally, all the ones that I've worked at, have been full of roses. And they've been from your standard bush roses to a lot of standard roses to weeping roses. And it's been great because some of the supervisors, the gardening supervisors, have taught me different ways of doing things. It's been quite interesting over the years to learn different ways and different methods of doing things. I think there's not one right way. I think it's just what suits, and if you keep things like at a cemetery, if you keep them standard, it just looks better. So I think that's one of the key things when you're working in a cemetery, as a gardener, that is. And now on to one of the other things that quite often happens, the in-banter talk or the in-house talk, or you talk with your fellow workers. We all had a good sense of humour, I think, and that helped when we were, working at a place like that, or working in a cemetery, I should say. You had to have sort of a bit of a good outlook on life, I suppose. So some of the jokes would go around, and you'd quite often have fun with each other about that sort of thing. The jokes aren't bad jokes. It would be like things like the people living on the other side of the street can't be buried in the cemetery. So just things like that. Nothing that was overly bad. If you don't understand it, it's because they're still living. They're not dead. So you can only obviously bury dead people, not living people. Don't know if that's dun. Should I have a yay? What do you call it? Dun with those drum roll. Anyway, so things like that we would talk about. You have to sort of keep it lighthearted, easy entertainment, I suppose, when you're out working around. And then, as I touched on earlier, often you weren't involved in the funerals. But having said that, I have been involved a couple of times purely as traffic management. So depending on how large the funeral might be, you may have a police escort if it's somebody that's widely known or celebrity or other. They just might have a lot of friends. So you might have to get involved and have traffic management to, park the cars, get them all in an orderly fashion, and the same thing when they're leaving, so that you don't have chaos inside a cemetery. So that's my experience of working in a cemetery as a gardener. Like I said earlier, it was great as a quiet time. You can get into your own mind, let it drift away, and you didn't have to fuss too much about other people or other things. only showing that awareness when there was things around, and planning your day was important. So like I said earlier, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel, click that subscribe button, and also the notification bell, don't forget to hit that. And thanks for watching. And before I go, don't forget, if you've got any comments or want to know anything about working in a cemetery, let me know, and we'll get back to you in the comment section. And people quite often leave their own things around, memorabilia I suppose you call it. So someone's left a bird, wooden bird. They've obviously planted some plants in their little area, their little plot. They've left a little gnome. I thought they might have been doing a garden bed just here, but I think it's just they've chopped down some trees, and then we've got some suckers coming back up, and some weeds. Looks like deadly nightshade. Yuck.